All right, welcome to the show. One of my very favorite authors ever, someone whose work I've referenced about 1 billion times on this show, Douglas Murray. Thanks for coming.
Hey, it's great to be with you.
Yeah, it's been a busy week for you. You've done Chris Williamson, Joe Rogan.
I know.
I'm sure. Do you talk to Lex Friedman at all?
Haven't yet.
I don't know if he's recording right now. He's kind of an anomaly.
Where's he based?
He's here, but he goes off and does random shit sometimes, and then kind of always seems to end up back here doing recording shows. I think he must front load a bunch, like record in advance, and then go do the stuff. Yeah. So you haven't been to Austin in 20 years.
No.
It's what do you see that's different?
I haven't seen enough yet. I've only been here a couple of nights. When I first came here, about 20 years ago, I was researching my first book, and I thought it was one of the most beautiful civilized cities. But I gather that even the idea of that made you.
I know. It's good, dude.
Is it all right?
It's fine. Yeah, just wipe it off.
But yes, it's clearly just another of the American cities that's changed in some ways for the better, in some ways for the bad.
Right.
I mean, this country it's pretty amazing the way in which cities rise and fall.
It's pretty resilient in a lot of ways, because I feel like stupid shit will happen, right? And then people just kind of move over to another area, and then stupid shit will happen.
And then
yeah, but we never seem to get the. I think I heard you say this in a conversation. I don't remember exactly when it was, but we solve problems so well in the West that we forget why we solved the problem in the first place.
Sure.
And then do away with the solution, thinking that it's discriminatory or outdated or whatever.
We cut ourselves off from the branch we're sitting on.
Yeah. I think that's actually the exact phrase you used. You're like sawing the branch off as you're sitting on it.
And then you complain when you plummet.
Right.
Blame someone else.
Do you think that's like? I don't like to imply like malicious intent or anything. So sometimes I just like to think about why something like that may happen. Like, is it our need to solve problems, and when we get too comfortable, we just create them for ourselves, or what do you think that is?
Well, you clearly have in Austin the San Franciscoization of the city, which is happening in lots of American cities I've been to.
It is.
In the last few years. I always thought it was a tragedy when it happened in San Francisco. What I really mean, of course, is increased homelessness, obvious, like people with very bad mental illnesses roaming the streets and presenting a danger to other people and themselves. Bits of town that used to be safe becoming very unsafe, and the residents kind of accepting it at a very just, like frog boiling level.
Yeah, what do you think, from the perspective of regular citizens, I suppose, but it's typically people on the left that err too far towards compassion without any kind of, you don't want to give, you don't want to get yourself into a situation, and this is from governing or like I was in the military from a leadership perspective, you want to be supportive and give guidance. But at some point, you have to take the training wheels off, right? People have to learn to do these things on their own.
Absolutely. The stabilizers need to be allowed off with people in their lives. It's a very hard conundrum, that, because most people want to be compassionate to people who've had a bad lot, and also we all know that, it could be us. I mean, that's one of the things I always think about homelessness. You think a reasonable attitude is, that could be me if I made a few bad decisions.
Or if I didn't have the family structure or support.
I didn't have family structure, or if I kicked that away, if I kicked away other people who wanted to help me in my life, if I, took advantage of them. I mean, a lot of people end up on the streets, obviously have like addiction problems, and they've ruined all of the relationships in their lives. And, everyone's capable of doing that. And so when we look at people who've done that, we understandably look at it with a degree of fear as well as pity. It's the fear of what I call tramp fear. It could be me. So you want to look after those people to any extent you can. At the same time, you can end up in that position that San Francisco got into many years ago, where it's just basically piss taking by this point. I mean, there are people for whom it is actually a way of life. Living on the streets.
It didn't just start with with Newsom and governor.
No.
Although he was the mayor back then, right?
He was, but then it went. I was reading San Francisco recently.
Yeah, Schellenberg is great.
Yeah, it's a good book, and it shows
I'm really
how-
glad he's. We were talking before the show. I don't care for politicians very much. I think it's kind of like rooting for referees to have a favorite politician, but. I am glad that people like him get involved. Like when an intellectual gets involved, and I think, frankly, based on his career and all the criticism of him, if anyone is uncorruptible in American politics, it's probably going to be somebody like that because he doesn't really give a shit about sides. It's
I hope
just
so.
Information, right?
I mean, the book's important because he shows how Democrats and Republicans led to this stage.
Yeah.
And a dishonest actor or a sort of partisan hack wouldn't concede that the other side had. They'd concede the other side had done something wrong. They wouldn't concede that their own side had. But yeah, I mean, in America, it is really horrifying to me that there are so many cities that have gone that kind of way. And I mean, now people do seem to move again in the U.S. and obviously Austin's
over the last 2
one
years,
recipient
for sure,
of
yeah.
that.
I mean, this was kind of an interesting time, and I haven't bothered really to research this, but I have to assume there have been in other countries before throughout history periods where there was great tumult and people redistributed themselves across the landscape somewhere. I'm sure that's been the case.
It tended to happen because of lack of resources.
Right.
It's interesting in America that, in a way, it's too many resources for people who haven't earned them.
Yeah.
That
Chris likes to say that. Williamson likes to say that there's a lot of people who are famous now that didn't go through any of the paces that you normally would have to earn fame.
Right.
Right.
Well,
so you're you're kind of unprepared for it.
But you're talking there about, a tiny top percentile of earners.
Correct. Yeah.
And the problem in American cities is the bottom wedge that leftists in general think you can address by giving them more things.
Right.
And actually, they need. Well, there are several things. One is you need a helping hand up in order to be able to stand on your own 2 feet. But you also. That can't be endless. This is quite
the training
harsh.
wheels have to come off at some point. Yeah,
it's a harsh point to make, and people don't like it when I make it. But at some point, also, some people are going to fail because they've been given chance after chance, and that's what they do.
Yeah.
And I don't think society can infinitely protect people like that.
Nor should it, right? Schellenberg does a really good job of setting the data side by side. So Salt Lake City did a housing first, no strings situation. Right. It lasted for about 18 months. And then I'd actually lived on the road where they did it. And right across where there's a bus station from the apartment complex I lived in downtown Salt Lake City, it looked like LA does now or San Francisco does now. It's just rows of homeless people, this open air drug stuff. I walked outside of my apartment one day, and there's a kid's bus stop right there as well, and some dude sitting on the bench with a needle about to go in his arm, and I just kicked the shit. I didn't beat him up, but I kicked his legs. I'm like, hey, get the fuck out of here, man. What are you doing? Like, if you do what you want, fine, but do it away from these children.
Yeah, no, that's I've tried since coming to the States last year. I've come here regularly a long time. It's the first time I've lived here. It's to try to visit as many places as possible I wouldn't normally necessarily get to. And it is interesting that in America the cities go down in the same way. And there are some really striking examples. I was in St. Louis a little while ago. And Ferguson, and these are places that have just had a really bad string of luck
for a while,
a long time.
Especially
now.
It's the east side of St. Louis that's particularly bad, right?
Yeah, they lost. They had 800,000 citizens in the 1960s. Then they're now 300,000.
That's not even the half of it, really. That's all post. I'm from St. Louis. So that's all really like post after it fell. It was the 4th largest city in the United States in 1904, and then it really kind of died. It really lost its trajectory. It was going to be like Chicago, Houston, that type of, and it just like fell off a fucking cliff.
Yeah.
I'd say around the Depression probably, and then post World War II really.
Post World War II with a big exodus. Apparently. Yeah.
That's really bizarre
that's interesting.
for a major American city.
Well, because you have all the great infrastructure of the state. It's still big, grand city halls and things like that, and then these just streets and streets of empty houses. I haven't actually seen that in any European city. I mean, God, European cities have their own problems, but not that one.
Yeah,
you know.
just like an abandoned. I mean, that's more of like an Eastern China seaboard kind of situation.
Is that right?
Like some of the towns they built for industry there, just never took off, and now there's like 100-floor high-rise up like condos and stuff that are abandoned.
But
It's very bizarre.
I like the way in America in which people do move around when things don't work, though. I mean, I do admire that.
It's a very Oregon Trail style spirit. About,
I mean, some years ago there was a story in the UK about it was a BBC story about there was a benefits cut that the then Conservative government were instituting. And, you know, the BBC, the national broadcaster, wanted to show what a terrible effect this would have on people. And unfortunately for them, the story they chose was of a man in Wales who complained that this would mean that he would have his household budget for the week would be restricted to the following extent. And he listed what he bought in an average week, and it basically included enough beer to get really smashed each night. Cigarettes most of the week until he ran out of the money for cigarettes and therefore would buy rolling tobacco. And like he listed all these things and said, well, you know, and it's not my fault because like the industry left the town. It's not my fault I don't have a job. Right. And it was very funny because the BBC like ran this story expecting everyone to be like filled with pity for this person. The great British public were just slamming this guy. It was like, get off your ass, go to another place and get a job.
I mean, we're not in feudalist England anymore.
No.
You can leave.
It's like you can leave. Yeah. But it is true that like in countries like Britain and France, if the industry goes, people do stay. And they are supported.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And in America, there is definitely that kind of look. The industry's gone. I'm going to have to move, and people do that all the time. Right. And I love that spirit.
Yeah,
I love that spirit.
But I feel like, I feel like the older world is a little bit more attached to where they came from, right? Like
yes, there is a bit of that. Yes,
people in America have always kind of moved around.
That's right.
But where are you from? And
I was born in London.
What borough of London?
I was brought up in West London.
West London. Yeah. So
SW6.
Yeah. Who's your football team?
My local football team is Brentford, who used to be a completely impossible prospect. People had never heard of it. They were lingering in the third division. They were in the third division.
Oh boy!
And now they're in the first.
Shit!
I know it's
so they're one step away, huh?
But unfortunately, I've never followed them with enough interest to be able to claim any responsibility myself.
Yeah, well, I mean, we call that a T-shirt fan,
right?
Although it also implies that it's like a university that you're a fan of that you didn't go to.
Sure.
That's another implication.
Oh God, that was by the way. Sorry to stick on St. Louis. That was the other thing. The team left.
Oh yeah.
That I didn't know that could happen in American cities, but
the Rams moved to Los Angeles, where nobody gives a fuck about football.
Right. It's
money,
just,
right?
like that seemed to me to be the ultimate
fuck you
to a city. It was like if you have a stadium built for a team and the team leaves the city, and then you just got an empty stadium. That's like that is. I just thought that was the ultimate humiliation.
It's like the ruins of a city.
It's just a horrible. At least if you've got a sports team.
They still have baseball and hockey.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, when they left too, the Rams' reason for leaving was like this place. They pretty much were like, literally, this place is a shithole. We can't make money here. It's just crime and poverty. We got to go.
Well, they're not wrong about that. Sorry, I mean that's kind of the way it is, and it's like one of the big themes of your book that you're here to talk about. The war in the West, and I would say it's a big theme in most of your work, is that people just simply aren't honest about things anymore.
Sure.
There are these cancers that pop up in American cities very frequently that are intentionally misdiagnosed, in my opinion, right?
What sort of thing?
So let's say NBC News this morning or last night published a report that gun violence is now the number one killer of young Americans under 18, basically. The part that they left out was which children, right? And, of course, they're hoping the audience will assume that it's school shootings and shit like that because it fits their anti-gun narrative, and the reality is that it's mostly black children in liberal-run cities.
It's the same thing with the knife crime thing in London.
Yeah.
They say an increase in knife crime, and what they mean is an increase in black on black knife crime between rival gangs fighting for similar corners.
Right.
It's the same thing. I mean, it's been a big thing I've written about, has just been this, on issue after issue, the desire of the media, politicians, and others to kind of find a narrative, stick with it, and not budge. And I've seen them do it, particularly politicians, up close. And you put it to them, and they just cannot move.
It's beyond cognitive dissonance. No one can exist like that permanently and really feel like they're honest. There's no way, right?
Yeah, and partly it's because if there are problems, and this probably happens in our lives as well, but there are problems which are, are your fault, which you just are never going to be able to concede.
Right. Well, I mean, Peterson, that's why Peterson lately for the last 3 or 4 months has been on that same kick. Identify one thing that you're doing wrong right now, and then figure out how to do it better or do it right. That's you're attacking people. People are like, oh, what does he mean by that? But the essence is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like, challenge yourself. And with the gun thing, it's not just racial stuff as well. It's also mental health, right? So 67% of gun deaths in America are suicide.
Yeah.
That is, if 67% of any group of something was one thing, that would be the critical identifier of that group.
Yeah.
But the gun is the boogeyman here, right?
Sure.
And I'm very suspicious of any government or movement that tries to disarm its population for obvious reasons.
Well, yeah, I mean, this country's history is unique in that respect, really. I mean, I don't think there's any other country like America that has that attitude.
Of all the things that America got right, I think that's probably one of the more important ones.
It's interesting when the citizenry feel powerful, and they don't just feel as though they're people to whom the government can do whatever the government wants to do.
Right. And then
it's a different mindset completely.
Yeah. The other part of the gun thing is 69% of gun deaths are with handguns, right? Not rifles, assault rifles or whatever.
Why is that?
Because handguns are everywhere, right? But it's also the one that is more difficult to get. So And most gun crime, I think 85% of gun crime is committed with a weapon obtained illegally as well. So none of these, they don't want to talk about mental health, right? And I think it's kind of like when you're walking down the street and you see something happen, it's like the bystander effect. If you pay attention to that, if you look at it, then now you're responsible for fixing it. And it's easier just to blinders, obfuscate yourself. That's what I think the left citizenry does. But the politicians are clearly angling towards one thing.
They do. It's this thing of fixing on one explanation for everything. I mean, you mentioned mental health, for instance, and I mean, like, what are you going to do about mental health?
Right.
Like, everyone's got mental health, as we now call it. Like, we've all got health. Everyone's mental health could break down again, if it's often through no fault of their own. What does society do about that? Can it make sure that that is never the case?
Well, there's any kind of zero policy leads to authoritarianism, right? Like, you can't have that in anything. Even in medicine, which we're seeing in China, zero COVID policy is insane.
Unbelievable.
That's insane, right? Like
Jesus, there's pictures from Shanghai.
Or the video of the people screaming and jumping out of windows and shit. That's
unbelievable.
That's pretty rough.
And that already, I don't know if you've ever been to Shanghai, but I mean, Shanghai already is like Blade Runner.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's very bizarre.
Yeah, but that's what people fix on. They fix on an explanation like that, and you think, well, what would you do to even address that?
Well, I like what Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff say, like, prepare the road, or prepare your children for the road, not the road for your children. Because you can't do the latter.
Well, you can do it, and then there'll be a terrible road crash. I mean,
at some point, right?
You run out of road.
That doesn't scale to any reasonable degree.
No, I mean, that's why. I mean, in a way, one of the most important things that I think we need to inject into societies like ours is what we used to call Stoicism. I mean, it's frankly I mean,
little Marcus Aurelius.
Well, yeah. I mean, our age has been for quite a long time. We have had the kind of, even before the latest bout, the kind of Disneyfication of our brains, where everyone is a potential prince or princess.
Right.
Everyone is a special magical being. and
Don't you think that leads to like just benighted age? It's like it ultimately leads to nihilism, in my opinion.
well, it's narcissism first.
First, for sure, yeah. But then at some point, your brain figures out that you're just a piece of shit, like everybody else.
Yeah,
right?
not that special. I mean, that's one of the. I don't understand why, as I say, that this kind of narcissism, nihilism thing in America has been allowed to run so long and so far because, as I say, Stoicism works because it just confronts the facts of life, tells them to you in advance, and tells you there's nothing you can do about these things. You know, you're born and you'll die,
right.
and these are the kind of options in the middle. And at least you know that, and you're not going to go kicking and screaming.
Yeah. Carl Sagan used to say, it's far better for me to see the universe as it is rather than persist in delusion, regardless of how gratifying it might be.
Well, that's
a scientist saying that I need data to do things.
Well, there's also, I mean, in a way, I hate talking about right-left kind of things these days because there's not that clear a difference as there used to be at times in the past. But that having been said, there's quite a big left-right difference now well, there has been for a long time in attitude, in that the left has tended to have this attitude for a long time of the meaning of life will be found in struggle and political activism and doing things and getting to places. It's
a very Buddhist viewpoint, right?
Well, is it?
To struggle against the world and to deny yourself simple pleasures and things like that.
Maybe. I mean, I hadn't thought of that at that length, but that sort of engage in activism that will give your life meaning.
Right.
Ignores the thing that many people on the right, not all, but many people on the right have as an instinct, which is you also have to make peace with the world as you find it. You know, I mean, a certain amount of if you see injustice, sure, try to address it. But also you've got to find a way to have peace with the world as you find it. It's not endlessly possible to just struggle and not be really very unhappy.
Well, I don't think so. You're a student of pretty much everything, politics and culture, I would say, in the West, and it's like this weird shift for the American left to now just have completely abandoned the working class in America, right?
Right.
For all of these wedge social issues. It doesn't make any sense. If you're uninitiated, it doesn't make any sense, but I think it's the same thing that happened with race. The entire industry of social justice industry was created to do something, right? Good, right? You know what I mean?
Had a purpose at the time.
Yeah, it was a movement, a genuine movement towards racial equality, and it was kind of, still had momentum from the late 19th, early 20th century labor movement and all that stuff. But this is what happens with certain institutions from time to time. Their purpose gets reduced to just propagating their own existence at some point. You know what
things
I mean?
like that. Charities as well, good causes.
So fearful they're going to lose their budget or whatever.
And they'll lose their pensions and their salary. They're paying a mortgage.
So it's like they create a golem behind every curtain, whether one exists or not. And
it's hard for outsiders sometimes to notice that's what's going on.
Right. And then the purpose becomes, like, I've been really close to high-level organized labor. Like, I worked campaigns during the Wisconsin governor recall back in the day, and I worked some stuff in California as well in the Bay Area, just on the other side of what I actually believed to see what it was like. You know what I mean?
What sort of thing?
Well, I'm not apolitical, but I don't. All politicians are cunts. That's a brand that I own, right? I have the trademark for that. Actually,
it's a fine brand.
Yeah.
Hold on to that.
Yeah, I don't care for these folks very much. I just wanted to see up close what it was like, and it's just social ladder climbers, right? It's like what you described, which is, and it's what I'm getting at. People can't be content with. There's no end state that they would be comfortable with. The activism is the point.
It's the point.
So winning the fight isn't the point. Getting paid to fight it is the point for a lot of these people, especially in organized labor.
Have you ever come across a politician you admired?
There's a dog that got elected mayor of a city in like Montana or some shit, so I'm into that. A politician that I admire.
How about including the dead?
I liked Eisenhower, right? He was
Mm-hmm.
a conservative guy, and at the time, if you recall, Republicans in the middle of the century, actually from the late 19th century on, with Monroe Doctrine, were pretty anti-interventionist, right?
Sure.
And kind of got back to that again. It's so interesting to me. Like, I know the impact that George W. Bush and Dick Cheney had, but all of the wars, the major wars that we were in the 20th century America, were all begun by Democrats, right? Whether we got dragged into one or started the Vietnam War or whatever, it was never a Republican that started any of those conflicts,
Right. Yeah,
including
yeah.
the Korean War, Vietnam,
true.
both world wars, and all the stuff that went on in Somalia and Iraq in the
Yeah.
90s, for the most part, except for George H.W. Bush, obviously, in the Gulf War. That was the only outlier. So he very clearly had those principles. That's Eisenhower. But still, he followed up and fully funded the GI Bill and the VA home loan and stuff like that, which a lot of people credit for building the middle class in the country. Not exactly a conservative thing to do, I guess. And also helped build the interstate highway system, right? Not the most conservative thing to do, I guess, to expand the government, spend a bunch of people's money.
Well, there's no reason why it couldn't be. I mean,
Right.
you know, it's viewed by people now. That's because the right and left has ended up in this bizarre position where the right thinks, or parts of the right think, you should spend no money on infrastructure.
Right, yeah.
So, well, you can see the results of that
Yeah.
across America.
Yes, yeah. But he had, I guess, the temerity to be a conservative in a pretty interesting political climate. The Red Scare had just kind of begun when he took over, and did whatever he wanted to anyways, and did it pretty well and was well respected. So yeah, him. I think he's also the last conservative president America's had. Frankly, I don't really. I don't buy, like, Nixon was pretty conservative, but he's a total criminal, right?
Yeah, he had his moments.
Yeah. Reagan, taxes were raised 5 out of the 8 years. He tripled the national debt.
So for you, those are the main things, like the
That
non-intervention.
the intervention drug war stuff that he did as well. Like, I understand that a lot of the economic situation he was in was fallout from rollback during the Cold War, right? Just outspending the Russians and stuff.
Yeah.
And maybe that was important. I don't know. Honestly, everybody thought the world was going to end,
Yeah.
But that, to me, is not conservative. Then, of course, George W. Bush presided over the largest expansion of the federal government in history.
Sure.
And started
Still
2
living with.
wars. You know what I mean? So, I want to know, like, what does it mean from your perspective to be a conservative in 2022? Like, what does that mean now?
I mean, it's just going to mean lots of different things. One of the strange things about conservatism is that, of course, it means different things in different places and countries. I mean, Americans are conserving something different from what people are conserving in, say, Sweden or Australia. One of the things that often happens in our time is the confusion that comes about when you realize that you're a different culture from even people that look quite similar, or seem quite similar as societies. A lot of people have been amazed at what the Australian citizenry are willing to put up with, but they seem to be like America and Britain, but they're not. They have a very different view about government.
I saw quite a few people say it's not that big a deal, and like that is a big deal.
That wouldn't be, that would be a big deal among Americans, including on the right. In Australia, it's less of one because they have a different attitude towards government, much less distrust towards government. And but my point is that it's always an advantage of the left that they tend to have the same set of policies in lockstep everywhere around the world. You know, the following claims, and so the right is always at a slight disadvantage in that it doesn't have that same policy because it doesn't have the same things it's trying to conserve. And in America, obviously, there's a proper and vibrant right wing, which there isn't in every country, and there are just masses of differences within that. I've realized that more and more as I've been here. And it's quite hard for an outsider to realize just how many different slices of this there are. But I think, and of course, I suppose the main difference that goes on the right in America is, are you somebody whose aim is to slow down the march of what the left is trying to achieve,
Right.
or to do another game completely.
Right. I mean, it does seem like the American right has been on its heels for a while, right?
Yeah, I think that's true.
Like
Which is why a lot of
they're on defense most of the time.
Yeah, which is why a lot of people liked Trump, because he played offense.
Yeah.
And they liked that.
What were
and
your
not
thoughts?
many conservatives have.
What were your thoughts about Trump?
Oh, gee. I spent most of his presidency trying not to talk about him, mainly because everybody in the world has a view. I think it's a very mixed bag. I never liked him particularly as an individual.
Right. Yeah.
I never thought he was a person who you'd want to look up to particularly. Didn't think he was a great role model.
Right.
I thought that since he was someone who had played the game between the parties for a long time, there was a high possibility it was all quite cynical. I thought that he had extraordinary bravery and courage to do things that other people wouldn't do, or would say they would do and then just wouldn't.
Right.
At the same time, he seemed to me to be lazy on actually getting stuff done and the details. And he complained that it was because of other people, but to a great extent, it was his own fault.
Right.
You've got 2 years where you've got the House and Senate. There's no excuse. Positions he didn't fill, couldn't fill, because of that central thing. He had problems getting people to come on board because people didn't trust him. And then you saw time and again why that was the case, because the people who did go out and bat for him very often discovered they'd been left alone, abandoned by him. So, it's a very mixed bag. And the main thing, though, is that, personally, I wanted to not spend 4 years only thinking about Donald Trump, because in my experience, both of right and left, it deranged a lot of people in this country.
Yeah. Schellenberger said the same, that he intentionally leaves politicians' names out of all of his books, because when smart people hear the words Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, they get stupid really fast.
I think that's true. And I put it a little while ago, there was a conservative conference, and I said, I hate the fact that everyone on stage has to pretend to know less than they know about Donald Trump.
Right, yeah.
It's not a happy situation to be in. Why can't you admit the pitfalls and the positives?
Right.
It's because they've decided which gang they're in, and they just want to stick with the story.
Yeah, it's like some weird confluence between tribalism and confirmation bias at this point. Like everything gets filtered through that lens. And do you think that's like moral cowardice, or do you think it's? To some degree, it's got to be that. But also, do you think it's the amount of information, dis, or actual that people are inundated with, or is it like?
Well, if you're going to gain power, you do have to be organized,
right?
And that includes message organization. You have to have collective responsibility in government, and that trickles down to the party as well. And so, it's not just cowardice. People, you see it in like press spokespeople's faces and things, as you know. You see the same thing with Biden's people. Like, you wish they could just stand up there and say, "Look, it's not ideal, the guy we've got, but he's president, and this is what he's done today." But of course they couldn't do that, because they couldn't stay in their job.
Yeah.
And so you have this terrible thing where everyone sitting, watching the person at the podium, knows that the person at the podium knows more than they're able to say, and they can't say it. And I think that's one of the reasons why, that's one of the causes of great cynicism about politics. Why didn't you just admit it?
Right.
He didn't misspeak. He didn't know what he was talking about. He'd forgotten.
Or he said something stupid.
He said something stupid. We've all done it.
If I actually did the math on this, if 1% of all the stuff I say is stupid, then there's 7 minutes a week of me on camera saying stupid shit. That's not a good. 1% doesn't sound like a lot, but it accrues
when
over
you
time.
add it up.
Yeah.
That's right. the sort of shaking hands with people who aren't there stuff. You can do that with everyone. It's sort of unfair, but you can edit anyone.
Yeah,
to look stupid. But then there is also the problem of people who are not capable of fulfilling their office.
It feels like that quote from 1984 sometimes, where in the end the party will ask you to believe, in the end the party will tell you that 2 + 2 = 5, and you'll have to believe it, and that whole sentence after that.
Didn't you love that? I write about this in the new book, but didn't you love it when there was that bit of the left online that was actually trying to persuade people that 2 + 2 = 5?
It's like the OK symbol. Like some dummies on 4chan made it up, literally just to troll the left, and they fell for it immediately, and people lost their jobs.
Yeah, there's the guy who I write about who was on Jeopardy.
Guy, yeah.
You know, who does the 3 fingers. And I was like, before you know it, every contestant of the last 5 years signed a joint letter denouncing the 3-finger guy, who then had to explain that he wasn't a closet Nazi giving out white supremacist salutes.
It's insane.
So yeah, there's a massive amount of that going on.
Is it cowardice or laziness or stupidity that leads to this proclivity for people to accept what they're told and parrot and act on it immediately without any evidence? So you talk about it a lot in The Madness of Crowds about the trans issue and how it's definitely not settled science.
Sure.
But people are being spoken to and prosecuted, and policies being made as if it was.
Oh yeah, no, I won't allow the phrase trans child.
Yeah, no, that's not a thing.
There's no such thing as a trans child, and
like a Republican child.
Yeah, I mean,
or something like.
It's infinitely worse than that.
I think Sam Harris made that point back in the day. Like you would never hear of Muslim math or a Republican child, but you hear Christian child or Muslim child.
But trans child is so much worse because the Christian child or Muslim child might grow up to be a different religion or of no religion, or lose faith in the whole thing. Trans child is something that is going to be operated upon and drugged by adults, and experimented upon, and then if said child decides as an adult that's wrong, well, that's unfortunate because somebody flayed your arm and tried to stick something looking like a penis in your abdomen.
Yes.
And that's not optimal. You know.
What do you think it is that's happening right now psychologically with people? Like, why are so many people willing to just accept that? Is it they're afraid of the social consequences or the employment consequences, or is it something deeper?
There's one very deep thing that's going on underneath everything in our time, which is that we've lost all of our main stories. And that I can't emphasize this enough. This doesn't mean, and I'm not saying that means that absolutely everybody has lost their stories. I'm saying, as a society, America, much more advanced Europe, has lost connection with its story. And that's on several levels now. There's the religious level, and again, I should stress, I'm saying this as a non-believer. I'm making it as an observation. I have no vested interest, as it were. But if you had a belief in a religion that cohered society and gave you a vision of what you were meant to do, that was a very useful thing to have. And if you lose it, you are going to lose something very significant from your society, and you're going to have to do something else. Now, here's the other rider in America, and what I do a lot about in the war in the West is you've also begun to lose your national story.
Right.
Now that on top of the religious one, that is fatal.
Well, it's like we're not just losing the national story; it's getting replaced with a different story.
So this is my point. You begin by losing your story. As you lose your story, another story has to come in. Has to come in. So most countries that have lost the Christian ethic have got the multiculturalism ethic as a replacement. Okay? Diversity is our strength. No, it's not. Diversity's a mixed bag.
Right,
There are pros,
like anything else, right?
Yeah, like there are pros and cons. As I said in The Strange Death of Europe, we've got a bit more gang rape and beheading than we used to have, but on the plus side, there's a wider range of cuisine. So it swings and roundabouts. And,
very good.
But the point is that we've decided, no, it's only a good thing.
Right.
So then when somebody gets murdered, say, by somebody who shouldn't be in your country, you say, but diversity.
Right. But there's still the human requirement to explain that. So the only acceptable explanation is to blame it on England, not on the person or wherever you are, right?
you just ignore that the problem is more complex than you're pretending because it's a faith. Like diversity in modern Western countries has become an article of faith.
Sure.
Diversity, inclusivity, equity, these are...
I like the way you rearrange the order to make it more appropriate, yeah, because that's exactly what it is.
The diversity, I think it was Jordan who did that first, but the diversity, inclusion, equity thing has become the foundation faith. And it's come in, of course it would, something has to fill up that void.
Right.
But what I hate about it in America is that the American story that you had, and that some people still have, was a story about heroism. It was a story of improvement, including self-improvement. That's why, and this is why one of the things I focus on in the War on the West is the way in which our history has been assaulted. Because there is now not a damn hero we had that hasn't been taken down. I'm like, I don't need to tell you, but in America, all the founding fathers have been rewritten.
Oh, yeah.
All of them.
Yeah.
You go from arguably a century ago, people didn't particularly know that Thomas Jefferson had slaves, to that's the one thing everyone knows about Thomas Jefferson.
Not the Declaration of Independence.
Not the Declaration of Independence. You have the same thing with Abraham Lincoln. I mean, Lincoln's story, I was speaking to one of his biographers the other week, Lincoln's story is one of the great American stories. It doesn't matter what your politics are. It's a story of somebody coming from absolutely nothing. And becoming the president. You know, Lincoln probably had 1 year of education, and he was being brought up. And he was basically brought up in the Iron Age.
In the middle of Illinois, nowhere.
They had nothing. And he not only goes on to become president, but one of the greatest presidents America's ever had. And this used to be cause to celebrate him. And now, and I've seen it myself in American cities, the Lincoln statues get torn down, either by the mob, as in the case in, say, Portland, or in other cities, by the authorities who say this isn't a person we want to revere anymore. These are values we don't recognize. In New York, when the city council chamber voted to take out the statue of Thomas Jefferson, some obese idiot on the council said, he doesn't reflect our modern values. Great.
No shit.
You know?
He's not alive now.
My God.
Why the fuck would he reflect our modern values?
I know. My God, Thomas Jefferson didn't have the same values that we have in 2022.
Like, he didn't
even
know algebra, guys.
Right.
Like, that's how stupid that statement is.
You know, one of my favorite points about the people who lived in that time and why they had different views on us was that there were things they just didn't know.
Right.
Like, in Thomas Jefferson's day, I make this point in the book, in Thomas Jefferson's day, one of the reasons why what we now would regard as racism existed was because people didn't know that human beings were from the same stock.
Right.
Like, nobody knew that Africans and Europeans were related.
Same, yeah. Until, actually, I mean,
it took into
technically
the 90s,
until the 1900s, right? Until DNA
yes.
was discovered, but
late 19th century people were becoming aware. But this is long after Jefferson's day. People didn't know we were one human race, and so.
Right.
So anyhow, but this whole thing of attacking the heroes of America, in Britain it's attacking Churchill, because, you know, if you take out these seminal figures, you've basically left us without heroes.
Right.
What's the result of that? We have new heroes forced upon us, and we've got to sell it. And it's so pathetic because it's so transparent. It's, you know, you've got the god of, I don't know, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and it's like, fine, like, admirable woman. I'm delighted.
I like her too.
Yeah, but
Right?
I'm not gonna like make her an identity.
Right. Yeah.
I know, like a few civil rights activists. It's like, yeah, sure, but they're adding to a nation, hugely adding to a nation. But you can't make them the nation.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You can't make, what's her name, Amanda Gorman, you know, who read
the young poet woman from the Super Bowl, I think.
Yeah, from the inauguration.
Oh, it was the inauguration.
Read that, like...
She did something at the Super Bowl, didn't she?
Yeah, she got booked to the Super Bowl after the inauguration.
Knew it. Sorry, we did our hard seltzer launch at the Super Bowl, and I was blacked out by halftime, so I have no idea what the fuck happened. I just kind of casually remember her getting booked for that.
All I can say is that it would be better to black out before she started doing some of her poetry, because my point is like there's this banal ethic, which actually, I don't want to beat up on this poor girl, but I mean, like, what she was saying at the inauguration was the new ethic of America, which is this weird, like, flimsy diversity thing, and it just seems weak, very weak to me. And by the way, I think that has consequences. I don't know if you saw that poll the other week asking Americans if America was invaded in the same way that Ukraine was invaded by, you know, a country with tanks and so on, would you stay and fight for your country? And it was pretty much 50-50 in America.
Yeah. Well, it was 78% of people who were Democrats would not, I think.
That's right.
Which is a weird thing to admit to be honest.
That's the other thing, is that when that poll came out, they were like, what a significant, like almost half of Americans would, including a third of Republicans, I think, said they wouldn't fight for their country. They wouldn't stay and fight. They'd like flee to Canada, assuming it wasn't Canada who'd invaded. You think, well, that's what you said to a pollster. Most people say to pollsters what they think the pollster might think makes them look good.
Yeah.
So the actual figure might well be higher than that. Like, when people were saying, and there was a little bit of it, it's like, how on earth did this happen? Like, this is one way it happens. If you say your nation's total shit, and it has been from the beginning, and the majority in it are shits, like, and then at the end of that, why wouldn't you give your life for that?
Yeah, right. That's not a very good value proposition, is it? You're talking about losing stories. I mean, a lot of these stories are about nuance and how to deal with challenges, right? It's like almost like biblical parables. When you look at these stories, you can divorce yourself from the circumstances of the time and maybe even the character of the person involved, but you can learn lessons from people that made good decisions under a lot of fucking stress. Like John Adams. So To Kill a Mockingbird, I've always thought, was kind of based on John Adams. You know, at the what was the not Lexington Concord? It's pre-war, before the Revolutionary War. Sorry about that, by the way.
When he was defending the Redcoats and on trial for the Boston Massacre.
There's a name for that.
The Boston Massacre?
Boston Massacre, yes.
Oh, yes.
Redcoats are lined up. Sons of Liberty provoke them into shooting the crowd.
Right.
John Adams decides to defend the English soldier, right? The sergeant and all of his men. And I've always thought that To Kill a Mockingbird was kind of loosely based on that. That is a really good fucking story. It means principles matter than prejudice.
Absolutely.
Principles over prejudice is a story that you can wedge that into any time in human history, right? Even into the future, and that's going to be a salient thing. And when you remove that away, that's a big problem, right?
I agree. And I think one of the things that a lot of people in America haven't realized yet is that this is going on under their feet and has been, and that it's been going on at a much deeper level than they realize.
Well, it's probably frightening to admit. Americans have become pretty intellectually lazy in a lot of ways.
Well, most people are. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not just an American thing.
Well, certainly not, but I think Americans have experienced comfort for so long that the idea of discomfort is like that's a negative. Like discomfort isn't negative. Most of the time, it's either a signal that something's wrong or it's a signal that you're getting better at something, right?
Yeah, Americans, to make a horrible generalization, Americans haven't actually looked over the edge of the cliff for a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, arguably, in some ways, since the founding, you could say.
Maybe,
at least since the Civil War.
To some degree, maybe during the Cold War for individuals, maybe, but definitely not as a country.
They were aware of it, but you didn't. I mean, America hasn't suffered what, for instance, I don't know, Belgium suffered in just great cities just being wiped out and never rebuilt.
Or even the Blitzkrieg. We have no concept of anything like that. It's 9/11. That's pretty much.
Yeah, an American friend of mine in London came to London a few years ago. I was living there, and we were talking something about the architecture of the place. I said, well, you have to realize that one of the reasons why all these bits of the city have great, ugly replacement teeth in them is because this was just night after night bombing, and we never replaced those buildings with anything other than kind of things that we just rushed up after the war when there was no money. every European, every British person has reminders all the time. I mean, we have towns like Coventry that were great towns that were totally flattened in the Blitz. And so...
And also 45,000 people died, right?
Yes.
Like America's not experienced anything like that before.
And I mean, to nightly, and I obviously I grew up with these stories, to nightly have to go to the basement of your house or hide under the kitchen table or whatever, every single night. And, and after a big raid, there was one, I remember somebody telling me that the dust didn't settle back over London for 3 days, and that was commonplace. And so Americans haven't been reminded of their mortality in a way for a very long time, and it's very, very lucky. But one of the things I always try to bring across, particularly to American students, is that's not normal.
Right, yeah.
Like, that is not normal in the world today, and it isn't normal historically at all. It's incredibly unusual. You're very, very lucky.
Yeah.
And one of the things you see then is like, and that's why, just going back to those things like the trans madness and all this sort of stuff, is I constantly want to say, don't screw up something at this stage. Like, don't moan at the last point of rights acquisitions. Don't pretend you're living in hell.
Right, yeah.
Just because you haven't got absolutely everything you want and everyone else hasn't got. There's that kind of leftist thing of like, no one is free until everyone is free, or no one is. There's that kind of riffing on like, until everybody has all of their rights, I will not stop. And you go,
Right.
Well, you recognize to begin with, you're not in a bad place. It's you still have won the lottery of life to be born in America in the 21st century.
There's also a psychological impact of being in a good situation, and by force of social pressure or conditioning or whatever it is, being under, I guess, the spell of constantly trying to find something wrong. Like, we know people like this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. People who want to be oppressed.
Misers. They're not fun to be around.
The people who
frankly.
want to be oppressed are very, very commonplace. Now, I think that's one of the reasons why people go for the kind of non-binary crap is like they, or like queer and things. It's like basically they've not got enough oppression. They want some.
Right.
And,
well, you have to make it like something that isn't super structured. So there's no way to. It's an unfalsifiable situation.
Well, unfortunately, that's the case with mental health to a great extent as well. Some people are wickedly wielding it as a kind of way to win.
Like the young tennis player.
Oh,
What's her name?
Naomi Osaka.
Yeah, Naomi Osaka.
Yeah. And who was then made like Sportswoman of the Year or something.
Like the thing that we respect.
That's weird.
The thing that we respect about people who go through great hardship is the manner and grace in which they overcome the hardship, not the fact that they gave up.
And that they overcame it.
Yes.
Honestly, it even gets in minor ways, like Karl Anthony Towns last night.
Yeah.
What's that?
Just the basketball player last night, he just kind of like took the night off, and then after the game, when I say took the night off, meaning he was very lazy on the court, and after the game had everyone else to blame. And that's not really somebody that you can... It's not somebody you can deal with. Like a person that refuses to accept responsibility for their own actions, that's not somebody that I care to deal with.
Well,
because how do you? You know what I mean?
One of the absolutely central things, this is this bugbear I have about the American ethic turning from admiration of heroism to admiration of victimhood. I hate that. It didn't have to happen. But this is an example of it.
It's very malicious too. Like, there's no good reason to do that. There's no good reason to amplify people's weakness.
No.
You know what I mean?
Well, no, because it's contagious.
Yeah.
Among much else, it's contagious. Heroism is contagious. As you know, a very brave company commander demonstrating bravery will have a very brave company. A company commander who's found, crying and saying, I don't know if I have the resilience to get through this, is going to have that replicated among the men who he's meant to be inspiring. And that's why I actually have among many of my views and feelings which run against the age, this is one of the strongest, is I do not believe that we should have an infinite amount of time for people grousing about their ill luck.
Right, yeah.
Like a certain amount of time for people in certain very unlucky positions
Right.
who could be helped and want to be helped, but not endlessly. Like, I will not endlessly hear a Duke and Duchess telling me about their ill fortune. I will not have somebody born a prince endlessly telling me about the fact that he's unhappy. I don't know. There's too much unhappiness in the world. There's quite enough unhappiness. Right. You've just added to it by a millimeter.
Yeah.
And you could have shut up and
do you think
done something
from
else.
Their perspective or any patrician or celebrity rich person's perspective that they feel like they're trying to not associate, that's not the right word, trying to make it seem like they're just a regular person? And I don't mean that in a negative way.
No, I agree. Of course it's that. Well, privilege is one of the great sins of our age. Right. And among other things, everybody who's white is meant to have it, which is not observably the case. Right.
So showing that you're a little bit damaged as your defense attorney in the privileged court of law?
Absolutely. Showing that you've suffered is, if you are unfortunate enough to have been born white, unfortunate enough to have been born male, unfortunately enough to have been born straight and heterosexual, then what else have you got in the armory other than I've been prejudiced against, or I'm feeling sad, or I'm depressed, or I'm mentally ill, or I've suffered PTSD, or the various other things that are thrown out there. By the way, I mean, sorry, a little side note on that. There's certain types of mental illness that people like to say they have, and you'll notice there are ones that they don't, and the ones they don't are the ones that are really serious.
Yeah.
Like, nobody wants to be thought of as a schizophrenic.
Right. Yeah.
You know, because nobody wants to date somebody who's a schizophrenic.
Or bipolar is one that's a little.
Well, yeah, because it exists, and then it's a terrible thing, and people have to be looked after. But you also cannot have people like boasting that they think they're bipolar or self-diagnosing. Or then you get the one with PTSD of people saying certified PTSD. Oh, gosh, you've got a certificate, you lucky winner, you.
You got a parade with that, too.
And
huh?
But the point is that this has to be pushed back against. And I'm afraid it's quite an unpopular thing, because any time you do it, it looks harsh. But you have to. I mean, I have a friend who spent a lot of his career as a prison doctor, and he has a lot of amazing stories of the inmates he used to work with. And one of my absolute favorites was, he said that, and I think this applies outside of prisons, he said that quite often prisoners would come to him and say, Doc, I think I need some pills of some kind, because I think I'm depressed, sort of thing. And he would say, well, what do you why do you think you're depressed? And quite often what they said, one man in particular said, well, I think I'm suffering from low self-esteem. And my friend said to him, well, that's one thing you've got right.
That's good.
And the prisoner actually laughed.
Yeah.
And he said this always happened. The prisoners laughed because for the first time someone in the system had caught them out.
Right.
Yes, you may well have low self-esteem. The thing is, you should have low self-esteem because you're in prison for throwing acid in your girlfriend's face.
Yeah,
like,
no shit.
You're not depressed.
Right.
Or if you are, you're depressed for a good reason.
Well, yeah,
and the universe does not owe you a solution to that reason. And we shouldn't medicalize you out of feeling guilt for your crimes.
Certainly not.
So
I mean, that kind of defeats the purpose, right?
Right. So in the wider world, we have to be very careful of this. And we have to reacquaint ourselves with the idea that life involves a certain amount of suffering as well as a certain amount of pleasure. And you have to hope you get your ratios right. But you can't endlessly avoid bad things. And, one of the reasons for a form of Stoicism is, again, there's quite enough unhappiness in the world. We could all moan. And not moaning, when you don't absolutely have to, means you've just saved people from depressing them all a little bit more.
If you think about it as a contribution or debt or a credit or a debit, I guess, in the pool of human psychology.
Yes.
That's a good way to think about it, yeah.
And don't unnecessarily demoralize other people.
I mean, wait until you've got the solution and tell the whole story.
Well, that's
you know
a good idea. Definitely. If you can say, well, look, this is what happened to me, and this is how I got through it, and you could too. That's a reasonable story, but not I'm just stuck in this horrible situation. I don't know what to do, and I'm suddenly going to moan about it.
Yeah. Back to the book. I want to talk about some of this. I mean, I honestly, I could have an entire conversation about the madness of crowds. And I think there's 4 sections, but there probably could have been more, right?
In the War in the West?
No, in the madness of crowds,
yeah.
I mean, there's just so many different angles from which you could address the same problem, but I think the West has been an exporter of culture for a very long time.
Yes.
Right? I mean, there's quite a few countries, very successful countries right now, whose system of government is based largely on English common law, right?
For sure.
And the ideas that from the Magna Carta forward were kind of incubated there.
Yeah. There's still the countries where people want to buy properties.
Right. Yeah. Sure. I think it's English common law is one of the first like organically developed ideas about humanity that seem to at least have the intent, if not the result, of treating prince and pauper the same, right? That was kind of a big deal.
Equality in the eyes of the law.
Right.
Absolutely crucial, very unusual.
Very historically over the course of human history, yeah. There seems to be no room in the conversation to acknowledge the accomplishments or the benefits of Western imperialism anymore. It's something you touch on quite a bit in the book.
Yes, because again, it's like there are downsides and there are plus sides, and no one wants to do the maths because nobody knows quite how they do it.
Right. And God forbid you come up with the wrong answer to
Yes,
that equation, right?
Well, I mean, so we're very interested in countries which post-colonial countries that failed.
Right.
We don't seem to be very interested in post-colonial countries that succeeded. Singapore, say, Hong Kong until very recently. And I mean, you didn't hear people in these places moaning about the colonial era,
right?
Because things were going well.
Yeah. Well, it used to be that people who were suffering didn't moan that much. They tried to find a way to solve their suffering.
Right. And in the case of post-colonial countries in, say, Africa, everybody knows that take any African country that has not done well since colonialism. By the way, most of which are currently enmeshed in a new form of colonialism, which is Chinese colonialism, and no one really talks about that because we're so interested about talking about the 18th century. But these societies, the colonialism was the great excuse which dictators and military leaders used to excuse them robbing their societies of their wealth and putting them in bank accounts in Geneva.
Right.
And so you definitely do need to have an honest look at what colonialism was and wasn't. And but here's the thing. I mean, I concentrate, as you know, on colonialism and slavery at different points in this book because these are now used as the main bats to beat the West and to beat Western peoples.
Right.
Is to say you were guilty of slavery, you were guilty of colonialism, you are therefore guilty forever. And one of the things I say in the War on the West is, first of all, you've got to get some damn context.
Like how many people went east versus west.
Right. I mean, that's a great one that I go into in the issue of slavery. So about maybe 11 million poor souls were taken across the Atlantic in the transatlantic slave trade in total. About another, that number with another half, about 18 million. So 16 to 18 million were taken east. They were stolen in Africa by other Africans, as they were the ones brought across to America.
And this is the Muslim slave trade,
This is the Muslim slave trade. The Arab slave trade went on a lot longer and was actually a genocidal slave trade. The transatlantic slave trade, nothing good to be said about it, but it was not genocidal. People, they wanted to get the slaves across the Atlantic alive in order to then, work them. And, and I mean, obviously just a terrible thing to do. Every society in history had used slavery up till that point. The Arab slave trade of Africans being taken to the Arab countries, we don't know about today, among other things, because every single male African was castrated, so there would be no more black Africans in the Arab countries. And I think if we see, like at random sees the Americans off the street and ask them, not 1 in a million would know this fact. Same thing with colonialism.
Right.
Yes, the British Empire went on for a very long time, did undoubtedly extend itself to many countries across the globe, was very proud of it at the time, and now we have a rather more mixed view of it. But colonialism was very common in the past. It was regarded as being very normal, that if you were stronger than your neighbor, you rolled on into your neighbor and you took them over. And once people discovered the rest of the world, you did that there. Here's the thing. What should our attitude be towards that? We have been told in this generation that our attitude has to be one of unbelievable guilt, which we are born with, if you happen to be born white as well, which is why I go into this sort of weird war on white people at the beginning of the book. We're told that we're meant to be born guilty and that we can never get rid of that guilt, whatever we do.
Right, but
So
that's just like the foundational premise of the I always have to be an activist mindset, though, right? Like that's the mechanism that makes that work in somebody's life.
And
so that's the way they feel.
Here's the thing. I mean, it will make them have totally thwarted lives.
Right.
Because if you are told there is nothing good about your people, I mean, like, first of all, who the hell? None of us have a choice as to how we're born. Nobody asked us, so it's not my fault. Anything that anyone looked like me did in history. And by the way, I mean, it has to be said, I have zero guilt for colonialism. I have zero guilt for slavery. I don't see why any American alive should feel any guilt for these things because they didn't do them themselves. They should have a reasonable attitude towards the American past, which includes this as part of it and includes great things that America did as well. But there's no reason why somebody born in the 21st century should feel or be told to feel some hereditary guilt for something they didn't do.
Yeah,
it's unkind, it's unfair.
And a total waste of time as well.
And a total waste of time. But
like we don't get to solving the issues that persist if we're focused on that at all.
Well, I mean, one of my favorite stats is that there are 40 million slaves in the world today, estimated.
Oh, yeah.
40 million in the world today, which is more than there were in the early 19th century.
Yeah, there's 8 million in India, 3.9 million in China, including 1,400 active Uyghur Muslim concentration camps.
You know, and across in Sudan and elsewhere. In
Pakistan,
Africa,
North Korea, Nigeria, Iran, Indonesia, Sudan, Congo, and the Philippines, actually, with almost 1 million slaves in the Philippines.
You know, this is going on now. What if we spent any of our energies on this? Well, you see, even to make that point is to invite people to say, you're just trying to get away with your own crimes. They're not my crimes. I didn't do them.
Yeah.
You're asking me to assume guilt upon myself for something I didn't do. And here's the thing. When people are told to do this, they're being told to do it for a very specific reason, which is, therefore, you will achieve nothing in your life because your main point should be to spend your life cringing, to spend your life apologizing, to be humble for things because of something you had no involvement in. The end result, people from that, of course, are these like begging supplicants who say whatever they're told to say because they want to get through the era. It is one of the best ways to make sure you don't produce people who achieve something, who do heroic things, who are exemplary, who other people want to follow, who will be remembered, and much more. It is exactly the opposite.
Do you think it's revenge or...
The whole damn thing is revenge.
Certainly, there's always going to be that element to it, but do you think it's more revenge or more like a coordinated attempt to wipe out the culture in the future? Or are those two things even different in this context?
They're the same thing. They're the same thing. Revenge is the main driver. What we here in our age called justice is very substantially just revenge.
Right, yeah.
All I'm calling for is justice, people say. No. very often what they're calling for is revenge. You know, they talk about anti-racism. They seem to be very racist,
Right.
just against white people.
Yeah, we're resegregating everything.
Yes,
as well,
in the name of anti-racism,
which has like such and whenever these insane policies have the negative effect, like the gun crime issue in America is mostly a black issue, and I don't mean that it's all their fault. What I'm saying is they are the biggest victims, like most victims of gun crimes are black people. And pretending like it's something else means you're not solving that problem. And it's the same thing that happened with mandates in New York and other places. They effectively excluded like 65% or so of black people from public life.
Yes, that's right.
With a stroke of a pen.
Absolutely.
Not even law, but regulation, which is a big difference.
But you know, the thing is, if you come up with this one explanation for everything, like if you come up with this one explanation, everything is about racism, then when you look at gun crime statistics or knife crime statistics or whatever it is, you've got to say, well, it must be because of racism. Well, no, how is one young black man killing another black person to do with racism?
Right.
It's a multi-dimensional problem. I mean, it's likely to be a lot of things that have added to it. But unfortunately, in our era, this has become the one explanation for everything.
Right.
And it's totally unfit for purpose.
Well, it's also
untrue.
It's put us in a death spiral now because now we're making policy without settled science.
Sure.
We're making long-term policy on unsettled science or on obfuscated truths.
Right.
Right? That's the kind of thing that, like, it's one thing to have these blips. It's another thing entirely to have the institution become that.
Oh,
right?
you mean when they end up imbibing their own virus?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, almost every cultural institution has done that. Most government entities have done that. The moment when you see, I mean, I mentioned it in the book, but the moment when you see the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff actually saying in front of Congress that he wants to look into white rage, like, this is not a fringe thing.
No,
this is gone all the way up to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and one of the lessons we have to take from this is even the adults have abandoned the scene.
Right.
And what do you do about that? You make better adults.
Right, yeah.
You replace them with better adults.
But
You replace them with people who say, I'm sorry, you keep pathologizing whiteness. There's nothing inherently wrong with being white, as there's nothing inherently wrong with being black.
Right.
It's just a thing. And so don't pathologize it and come up with things like white rage, because you wouldn't have the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff a week after somebody had invented the phrase black rage saying, yeah, I'm really interested in looking into this thing called black rage. Don't do it to anybody. And the fact that senior figures in America are willing to imbibe this and repeat it and play with it like seconds after it's entered the public discourse from some fringe weirdo academic, it is terrifying. The line of defense in America turns out to be much, much thinner than we thought. You know, there are far fewer adults than we hoped.
Right. And I say this on the show a lot. I'm a big fan of Hanlon's razor because I think just assuming everything is a conspiracy is intellectually lazy, right?
Sure.
But, you know, when you see coordinated efforts to attack all of the institutions that protect us, right, from our stories, right, which give us something to fight for, I guess, to police and the military and masculinity at large.
Yes.
Then that seems like a very coordinated effort. I mean, I've planned quite a few military operations in my day, and the way people have gone about it, first capturing academia, right?
Yes.
So you have a constant source, like you're cranking out new woke people at a good
new
rate.
ultimatum.
Right. And then you move on people who are older using social and economic pressure. And then you go back for the kids to make sure it's a completely sustainable system forever.
That's a very good way.
That's kind of how it seems to me, and that's fucked.
Yes, because the older people, I mean, that's the thing, the older people have given in because they're told this is the new world. And this is what you've got to nod along to if you're going to enjoy your last few years.
And it used to be an important part of getting older to learn that maybe the way you used to do things isn't appropriate anymore.
Well, yes,
but progress for its own sake is not progress.
Yeah, there's also there's a role for older people to tell you to shut up and get your shit together. That's also a role.
Yeah, for sure. That doesn't happen anymore.
That doesn't happen anymore. Although there was one senator. I mean, was it Dianne Feinstein? There was one senator who's not in the finest fettle at the moment. But there was one senator a little while ago, I remember being lectured by some kids in her office who actually said, no, you don't know what you're talking about, you're wrong. I remember when I saw it, I thought, thank God for that. Don't forget, we are in a world where the Swedish schoolgirl truant is invited to lecture every government. Why? What's her expertise? What's her expertise in climatology? What's her expertise in economics? You put her in front of every leader in the world and she starts telling us about economic growth. Shut up. Go back to school, learn something, earn some respect, and then come back.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a good advertisement for your cause that the person delivering the message is a child, honestly. Well, I don't believe in this young prophet nonsense. That is absolute nonsense.
The person in question, because people always criticize you if you even criticize Greta Thunberg. They say you're beating up on a schoolgirl. Actually, she's not a schoolgirl anymore, I think. She's now
she's 18. She's actually the same age as Kyle Rittenhouse, I believe. They may share a birthday. I think I saw a meme about them sharing a birthday.
That's a very good comparison.
Yeah.
But when she first came on the scene, I said in a piece somewhere, I said I wanted to create an equally good construct from the other side. Like, what's the deal here? Let's say
like Greta Thunberg with a goatee, like an old Star Trek.
Well, I thought because obviously the perfection of the creation was young girl, autism, and what else? Swedish. Let's say I find a Danish boy with Asperger's who's 2 years younger than her, who loves fossil fuels.
Yeah, he's like a big natural gas fan.
Just massive on fracking.
That would be funny.
Does that win?
I mean, he would win on Twitter for sure, until they inevitably banned him, I suppose. But
as I say, the problem is the problem is not young people saying crazy stuff or doing crazy stuff. It doesn't matter. That always happens, and some of it's for good reason, and some of it isn't. The problem is adults continuously giving in.
Right.
And when you see things like, and it's one of the things I mentioned, the war in the West, when you see the whiplash we all got in 2020, when you're told, stay home, protect your health service, don't kill your granny.
Yeah.
And the most important thing is this, that you isolate yourself and don't leave your house. And then, like that, the most important thing is anti-racism. That's why you've got to congregate by the thousands and pack yourselves into the streets. That was like, now I know what you're doing.
But public health officials in the United States went on major news media programs and said, this is more important than COVID.
Yes, hundreds of healthcare professionals
Very
in the
bizarre.
US signed a letter saying racism is the real pandemic. Okay, well, you've just got us to isolate and lock ourselves in our houses for one pandemic. This one's one we have to turn out to the streets for.
Right.
Do keep giving us our instructions. I mean, I'm
it's
not
very
surprised
bizarre.
that people are becoming crazy about this.
What do you think, like, it's got to be odd for somebody, you've been involved in politics for a long time. It's got to be odd to go, and it is for me as well, from the 90s where it was fuck you, don't do what they tell you, to now it's like fuck you, you better do what they told you. It usually is supposed to not happen like that, right? I mean, in the process for which social change happens, I don't know how much time you spent in the U.S. in the early, like the 2000s.
Yeah, but I was here a couple times a year.
Right.
Yeah.
So marriage equality, gay rights in general I think, kind of started in the late 90s, like a real push for that here, and it took time. And the way that it happened was, in my opinion, that it happened organically. More people started to publicly identify themselves, and as such, as aspirational marketing happens, other people started to do it, and people began to realize that their friends and family were gay.
Sure.
And Like
that was the single biggest change.
Yeah. So they had like this whole 30, 40-year history, 20 maybe, history with this person, knowing that they're a good, normal person. And all of a sudden, like, yeah, actually, I'm gay. Like, oh, so that's not a factor in whether or not you're a good person or not.
Right.
Got it. Let's move
yeah.
on with our lives. And by 2010, that issue was pretty much over, right?
Yeah.
Except for that's effective social change kind of happens like that, right?
Yes, it's one of the ways in which it happens, and it's a very effective example. Just realizing that people are like you. I mean, that's how racist attitudes of the past started to evaporate as well. Was
Jackie Robinson, Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah, and
good speakers.
Like intermarriage goes up year on year. The numbers of people who say that they wouldn't want a relative to marry somebody of not the same race, declines all the time. All the factors are there for like a positive post-racial future, unless you allow anti-Western, anti-white race hucksters to seize the discourse, demoralize everybody apart from the people who, are bad actors like them. And that's why that has to be seized, because these people have actually diverted the course of the river.
Right.
There was a positive social change that had been happening. Again, people always say, well, Douglas, if you say this, you're ignoring this. I'm not ignoring anything that happened before. I'm saying that, broadly speaking, it seems to me unarguable that everything was going in a good-ish direction. To the extent that in 2022, we know the names of every single unarmed black person killed by police. You don't have to say her name. Everybody knows the names of the people shot in highly contested situations in America.
Right.
So it's not a secret of some kind.
Right.
But
I mean, how rare it is kind of a secret. Right.
Oh yeah,
it's 9 or 10 typically in any given year.
I say in the book that if you look at the misunderstanding Americans now have about their society, yes, you're right, 9 or 10 a year. It was 6, I think, in 2021. Unarmed black people shot by the police. 6 too many, but 6.
Yeah, certainly.
You look at the opinion polling of what Americans think the numbers are. People who identify as liberal in America, in one poll I look at, a significant chunk of self-identified liberals think that between 1,000 and 10,000 unarmed black people are killed by the American police every year. Among people who identify as very liberal, a significant chunk think the number is over 10,000. I'm like, so there's something wrong in the perception.
How can you be? I mean, is there? I need to look into this. Is there any other facet of life where people are literally 1,000 orders of magnitude off from what reality is?
It's very uncommon. I mean, to be off by this number, as you say, this number of orders of magnitude is very uncommon. Americans have been force-fed a false view of their own reality.
Yeah.
That is a wicked thing to do.
It is. That's why I never really seriously entertained any of the voting irregularity stuff from 2020, because my opinion is that you don't have to hack a voting machine if you can hack someone's fucking brain.
Right.
Like, why go to the trouble? There's no paper trail for hacking someone's brain.
Right.
There's actually no crime actually having been committed at that point.
And so here's the thing, as you say, I mean, it's kind of like spills out of colleges and things. And then, as Andrew Sullivan famously said, we all live on campus now.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. This was done by, as you say, hacking people's brains one by one, by kids being sent off to college and coming out stupider than when they went in, by being persuaded to run up debt, to be indoctrinated into a very facile idea of politics and meaning and purpose in life. So here's my suggestion. That worked very, very well. And as you say, person by person, kids going back home, telling their parents lies about their country and telling their parents they don't know the truth about their country. Well, here's the thing.
Well, actually, ...
Exactly.
Whatever.
So here's the thing. If that was possible that way round, it's possible to correct it as well.
Right.
It is perfectly possible. It's one of the reasons why I believe one of my self-appointed tasks in a book like this is to try to arm people with the facts. Arm people with facts they can use. Like what we were mentioning earlier about the slave trade. Like, have that fact to hand when you're in an argument with somebody who believes that only Americans ever have to bear historical guilt for slavery.
Right. Sure, yeah.
When you're talking about police interactions with the black community. Like, have some of the facts. You don't have to remember all the figures. You don't have to trick them all off. But you should know the basic arguments on this. Arm yourselves with the facts you're going to need to go back out there and persuade, whether it's your kids, whether it's your parents, and for some people it'll be their parents, whoever it is, to persuade them that the reality they are being told is true is not true, and that they have very good reason, purpose, and justification in feeling good about their country.
Right.
Not everything about their country, but who does need to think good about everything about their country? But broadly speaking, to realize what you've got here is good, it's worth defending, it's worth keeping on with.
You say if the West is to survive, it must be defended.
Yes.
But I'm not to say that's reductive or anything, but it's not just the West that's being defended. It's just common sense and rationality and the Socratic method, right? That's being defended.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
the rules of the attempt being made is to change the rules of the game. Right?
Yes.
That's what it is.
Like somebody announcing that the game you're playing is going to fundamentally change. The nets are going to be pulled down, and they are not only a participant and a player, but also the umpire.
Yeah.
They also get to make the rules whenever they want. No, they do not have that right. You don't have that right to do that in a society. You don't get to decide what the game all of us thought we were playing is going to be a different game. One of the hucksters I attack in this book and read so that other people don't have to is an awful woman called Robin DiAngelo, who's a white
fragility.
The author of White Fragility. I always call her the Miss Whiplash of anti-racism. she gets paid by people to smack them on the backside and tell them how naughty and bad they are. Robin DiAngelo and these people tell white people that there is nothing good about being white and they cannot escape whiteness. It's like, that is a wicked thing to do. And I read her and realized the errors of her thinking so that other people don't have to. But everybody should know what these people are up to. They have been indoctrinating young Americans, and they've got away with it for far too long. There's no reason why these people should have had such a free reign.
Yeah. I mean, we kind of fell asleep at the wheel, so we bear a lot of responsibility for what's going on.
We didn't see what was coming because it seemed so horrific. But who would have believed you if you'd said in 2021 this mad female academic would give a lecture at Yale where she talked about her fantasies of shooting white people?
With a revolver, I believe.
With a revolver, okay, that's a lecture at Yale now, is it? Yeah. We didn't, people were too slow in seeing it coming. And they were also worried about it. And obviously they worried about being called racist. And it's a horrible thing to be called because, it's especially a horrible thing to be called if you're not a racist. And you're just like, how do I get that taint off of me?
Yeah,
the answer is you can't.
There's an old aphorism about that. It's like, you don't want to be a guy in interrogation that's telling the truth.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because you're fucked. Especially in a place where they're going to torture you.
Right.
Like you have no truth to give to stop the torture at that point.
And these are, people are being invited to go through struggle sessions now. They are actually struggle sessions in American workplaces. Yeah. And I give examples.
Not just American workplaces, like the FBI and shit.
The FBI. Yeah. I give the example of one of the atomic centers in America, where the white males were made to go on this struggle session. It's like, and admit their white privilege. I don't know. If you're an atomic scientist, I'm not interested in you being put through that. Make sure the facility doesn't explode. Make sure we don't have a Chernobyl in America.
Seems reasonable.
Who's got time for this crap apart from anything else? Well, every single agency.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know how. I suppose they're not really doing their jobs.
That's your tax dollars at work.
Yeah, that's the other part of it. Like the indoctrination process, it came for everyone. It's the old poem about they came for the socialists.
Yes.
And we've been sitting around either afraid or unconcerned with our neighbor. I think if your personal constitution is such that someone has to be liked by or familiar to you to defend them, then you're a piece of shit, in my opinion, right? We don't defend. It's not even about defending individuals. It's about defending the idea that is the foundation, right?
Right.
So,
defending a principle.
Yes, principles are the only thing that really matter.
The other point just to make on this is I distracted myself with my hatred of Robin DiAngelo. But the point I also wanted to make about that was, you said this is being done in sectors which they have no right to tamper with.
Right.
Like, no, you cannot get away with pretending that mathematics is racist.
Right.
No, you cannot get away with pretending that the scientific method is racist or it's racist because it's Western. No, the scientific method has worked because it works.
Right.
The maths is not successful because it was conjured up by white people, which, by the way, it wasn't entirely by any means. But it's successful because it works, because 2 + 2 does equal 4. And when you actually have a system coming in which is trying to tell you that 2 + 2 = 5 because of racism, first of all, have the confidence and the guts to say no, this is something I know about. And secondly, and going back to what you mentioned Orwell in 1984 earlier, one of the people who got involved in the attempt to make 2 + 2 = 5 is, as I say in the book, says it's mentioned to him that Orwell gives this as an example of what happens in the society which has been totally destroyed and everyone's been brain fucked. Yeah. And this guy says, "Oh, that's unfortunate." Yeah, you bet your life it's unfortunate.
Jesus Christ.
You bet your life it's unfortunate that you ended up being one of the people trying to persuade the society that 2 + 2 = 5, knowing full well that it doesn't, doing so because you want to punish whitey, and finally doing it because you want to demoralize everybody. Sure, it's unfortunate that you're trying to pump lies into society.
Yeah.
That's a mistake. Whoops.
Well, I guess that's as good a place of any to end. Good Lord, what a stupid thing to say.
Yep.
I always wonder if these folks know that this is all just cultural Marxism, or if they've got cognitive dissonance about that.
They're a long way down the river. They don't even need to know the source.
Right. I mean, but so you do, before we leave, you make the point in the book that a lot of these leftist heroes from the past aren't great people either. Like Marx is a notorious racist. Foucault is a child rapist.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean, that's not ideal.
No.
They tried to destroy every single one of the founding fathers, every single American hero, every Western philosopher and thinker, every artist, everyone who ever created anything, every architect, every city as a product of racism. And much of it is done in the name of Karl Marx, who, as I show in the book, was a vicious racist.
Yeah, horrible human being.
Now, people have said since it came out, like defenders of it, well, he was a man of his time. Yeah,
exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Who wasn't? Who isn't? They say, well, we're not going to Marx for his views on race. We go to his views on economics. Yes, we don't go to Thomas Jefferson for his views on race.
Right.
We admire him for helping found America.
Right, yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah. Foucault, you can just throw that right out the window.
Foucault, I mean, yeah, I can't believe his reputation has survived these recent revelations.
It's very bizarre. Actually, I read, there's an article, I think it may have been the Daily Beast that wrote an article about, it was in 2019, like, we found out he may have, done some unseemly things, and they kind of dance around it. But should that mean that we do away with his work altogether? Like, maybe not.
Well,
right?
my view is...
The point is maybe not, is the answer to that question.
Yeah, my view is, if the work is useful and good, then you'd have to weigh that up.
Right.
I don't know, like with Michael Jackson or somebody. I mean, you got to weigh up, like...
Henry Ford was a notorious anti-Semite, but we all have cars now, right?
Sure, exactly. And you're not going to start walking again in protest at Ford's beliefs. So if it actually takes you somewhere, but when, by the way, as with Marx and Foucault, the thought is rotten, and they were rotten people, I don't find that to be a hard one to weigh up.
Those two in particular are pretty easy to dismiss.
Well, I say I like to arm people with the facts on those as well, because when somebody comes at you with this crap, like, know what to throw back in their face.
Yeah. Well, tell everybody where they can find you, where they can find the book.
There you go. War on the West.
Amazon, is that the best place for you?
Anywhere where books are sold, if you can find a bookshop these days.
Are you doing the pre-sale signing copies and stuff?
Yeah.
So that's probably on your website?
You can get that as well online. Amazon is a great offer. Audible, by the way.
Yeah, that's
because so many people listen to books now, which is just fantastic. I've done the Audible version myself, which I loved doing, and it's
very British. Like, I enjoy it. So Chris and I like to joke that he's like British light, and you're the full-on Brit. Yeah, it's funny.
What does that mean?
I don't know. Like you're just a little more posh, I guess, than he is.
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
And it's I enjoyed the audiobook very much. Thanks for sending that over.
That's great.
Yeah, so go buy the book, War on the West. I know all of you have read The Madness of Crowds already because I won't shut the fuck up about it, but appreciate you coming today. This has been great.
It's a great pleasure.
Enjoy the rest of your evening.
And you.
Thanks.